Welcome to the Doctors Making a Difference podcast. We have Chelsea Turgeon here with us today. I appreciate you coming on the show, Chelsea. Do you mind introducing yourself to our audience?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me and giving me a chance to talk to your community. And so I'm Chelsea Turgeon. I am, let's see, 6 years ago, I actually dropped out of OBGYN residency. So I was a doctor. I went through med school and did all of that. And I had this realization in the middle of second year that being a doctor was no longer the way I wanted to serve the world. I really had this moment of like burnout and rock bottom. And I came back into myself and reconnected to my purpose. And I asked, like, why did I do this initially? Like, why did I go into medicine initially? And what came to me was I wanted to help people live healthier and happier lives. That was sort of my foundation from the beginning. And then I asked myself, do I feel like I'm doing that right now? And at that moment, it felt like, no, like I don't feel like that's really what I'm doing as much as I want to. Of course, sometimes I'm doing it, but not as much as I want to. And then the question I asked that really was a kicker to me was, do I feel like I'm living a healthier, happier life right now? And I was like, no, I don't at all, not at all. And then the final one was, are there other ways that I could do this? Are there other ways I could help people live healthier, happier lives? And that was a resounding, like, well, it wasn't a resounding yes at that point. It was like, there has to be. And so I just sort of followed that. I followed my intuition and I ended up leaving medicine and finding my way back, in a sense, to medicine, because now what I do is I help other doctors who are struggling with burnout, who are kind of having that moment within themselves of like, what am I doing here? Like, what have I gotten myself into? And I help them connect back to their why, to their purpose, and then find their most aligned way to express that in the world. And so that has been really powerful work. So for the past 4 years, I have been helping doctors with that. That was not at all what I planned when I left residency initially. I was going to go travel, be a travel blogger. I like got a job teaching English in South Korea. We can go into any part of that that feels relevant for you. So this was not my initial plan, but then COVID happened and anyways, just like through the whole series of events and like following my intuition, this is what I ended up doing. And so now I have my own podcast, Life After Medicine, and I'm a career coach for physicians who just want to reclaim their bold dreams, their why, reclaim like the person they were before they got kind of beat down by the system that we're currently in, and then find their own unique way of helping others without sacrificing their own health and happiness.
Yeah, no, it's actually really good to kind of reflect. I think for all of us to reflect and say, why did I get into this? And am I doing the thing that I started out to do? And so
Mm-hmm.
it's probably a good exercise for every person to sit back and periodically do that and say, am I still doing this thing that I find fulfilling and good? So it's interesting. You had a really powerful moment there in residency where you were able to tap the brakes and kind of step out yourself and look and say, am I doing the most good in the way that I've been gifted to be able to do? And that's quite an interesting story.
Yeah, and in the way that doesn't deplete me too. I think that was like one of the biggest things is I want to do the most good possible, but when I'm doing good in a way that depletes me, it actually blunts the impact that I could have if I was
Yeah.
doing good in a way that energizes and kind of sustains me.
Yeah. Well, so walk back even before that. I'm curious,
Yeah.
like, talk us through the Chelsea Turgeon of the teenage years and the early 20s.
Yeah.
How did you end up in this field? Obviously you're interested in helping people and wanted to make this difference and ended. But how did kind of walk us through that path? Because that's interesting to get into medical school and then leave, but still be the same person or maybe even a better version of yourself.
Yeah, it's so funny because if you ask any of my med school classmates, like who's the most likely to drop out of residency and travel the world, I would be one of the least likely people. Like I was so gung ho,
You're like
like
gunner
top of
gunner of
my
the
class.
class.
Yes, I really was. And
Nice.
so it's like, wait, what even happened? But then we'll go back to even before that. So in high school and I think even like eighth grade, like yeah, definitely like in high school time, I was fascinated in like human potential, like human psychology, human potential. I had like a subscription to Psychology Today as a
Is an
15-year-old.
eighth grader? Oh, really?
Yeah. So my friends are like reading 17 magazine and Cosmo Girl, and I'm like, every other month it came, and it was like the Psychology Today issue. And like for those 2 months, I would just like read over it and be like, the psychology of rejection. Oh, this is so interesting. And like the evolutionary basis of that. And I would have before I could drive, I would have my parents drop me off at Books a Million. And I was like, I'm going to study, I'm going to like do my homework there. And I would do some of that. But then I would go to like the self-help aisles and like just browse the books and like take them off the shelf and be like reading everything about. So for me, there was always this fascination with psychology, but not like I didn't like abnormal psychology or anything like that. Like I was really interested in human growth and potential. Like I have this clear memory of my Psych 101 class, and there's like Maslow's hierarchy of needs on, he like drew it on the whiteboard because we still had like non-technology things at
Oh
that
yeah.
point.
Oh yeah.
And at the top of the pyramid, it was like self-actualization. I just have this like really vivid memory of like looking at that and being like, what is that? I'm so interested. And so there was just this kind of thread all throughout of like human growth potential. And I majored in psychology in undergrad. And throughout my undergrad years, I was like, okay, I'm either going to take this and like go into psychology and like do a PhD and study that, or I'm going to go into psychiatry and kind of take my psychology stuff and like actually go into medicine with it. And it's like really coming from this naive place of you don't really understand what being a doctor is like until you are one. And even if people tell you, even if you're shadowing, even if you kind of immerse yourself, it's hard to really know what the day to day is like until you're actually doing it. And so I think I had this idealistic version of like what it would be like to be in medicine. And I also was very influenced by other people's opinions, right? So you're like in college and you present, well, these are my two thoughts of how I'm going to use my psychology degree. And people are like, oh, you might be a doctor. That's so impressive. And so I'm just like swayed by that as like a young person who's like, I want approval and validation. I just noticed that people are very impressed by this idea of going into medicine. And so I think, in some ways that very much swayed what I decided. And so I ended up deciding to go to med school. And then pretty early on in med school, I realized psychiatry was not what I wanted to do.
How interesting. You think you would have all that interest from the eighth grade on. I thought maybe you'd be like, oh yeah,
Yeah.
psychology, psychiatry.
Yeah. Well, I love psychology. I like actually did this whole like um I was in like the psych club and I helped them we did this like motivational interviewing training and like helping people with smoking cessation. So I really did love sort of the coaching version of psychology. But when I did my psych rotation, it's not really like that. Like I didn't like the doctor patient relationship within psychiatry because it didn't feel like your peers, and you're never really peers, but it just felt like you're they're talking to you and you're analyzing, you're doing the psych exam on them as they're talking, but you're
Right.
not
You're
really
you're
engaging.
speaking from the authoritative upper, not
Yeah.
necessarily that you look down on them, but
Right.
you're analyzing to say, okay, what's the next step for this person while you're listening. You're not relating just like
Yeah.
your neighbor or your friend.
But like even like in OBGYN, it's like, yeah, you're thinking of the next step in the diagnostic plan, but like you trust their mental capacity as a patient. And within psych, it's like you're constantly like, oh, they're having delusions, they're having this thing. And it's like, yes, that's the necessary thing to do. But I just didn't like being in that dynamic. Cause even in like, cause what I ended up deciding was OBGYN, I liked the doctor patient relationship there much better because there was just a more, I don't know, like it wasn't a relationship of equals, but there was just something about it that felt more aligned for me.
Yeah, well, it's more joint decision making, that type of stuff for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Maybe that's what it is.
We always tell I'm a family doctor, but I work in a rural area, so deliver babies and all that stuff. And we
Yeah.
always
You do
tell
it all.
people, like at our little hospital, we always tell the moms, like, you're the queen of the day, whatever you want. And it's
Aw,
true,
that's so
but
good.
it has to kind of be that way. And so,
Yeah.
and that's one nice thing about that particular patient group is like, hey, this is your family. Let's make this the way you want it. And, so that's cool. You found that in OBGYN.
Yeah, and I thought I found it. Like I did. Like I do like women's health and like women empowerment and all of that. But when I look back, it's like the reason I actually chose OBGYN was because it was the specialty I like hated the least in my rotations.
Nice.
Like if I'm just being super honest about it, because it was this like process of elimination of like, okay, internal medicine. I feel like there wasn't enough action. I also like I have ADHD. And so I was like, I really wanted like action and to be doing something. And so in OBGYN, I felt like I was, you're like putting in birth control and there's like action and there's resolution as well. Whereas like chronic disease management wasn't something that was that interesting to me. But then really what that translates to in real life is chaos. Like long term, like the action that I enjoyed in med school really turned into a lot of chaos and stress as you're actually practicing.
Oh yeah, no, that's I think everybody listening to this can relate because everybody's been through medical school and residency, and then just real life. Unless you have a really cush, super subspecialist job where you don't do any procedures. Like my life is just chaos. Most of the time, you show up and like,
Yeah.
okay, we're in the clinic, and then we're in the hospital, and then we're delivering a baby, and then I'm taking care of somebody in the nursing home, and it's just back and forth and back and forth. So yeah, I relate with the chaos. Sometimes it's fun, but other times you're like, ooh,
Mhm.
that's a lot of chaos.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like as a med student, it felt like really positive stimulation because you're being utilized a lot. That they're like, oh, we need you to go do this and that. And so it's like, oh, I'm so useful. This is great. And like I was able to like stay awake during all those rotations, but then you get out in the real world and you're the one in charge of it. And I think there's a level of pressure and responsibility to the chaos as well that is a lot to manage.
Yeah. Well, so think back for a minute on so you're the bright, hopeful pre-med student like we all
Mhm.
are, and then you got into medical school and found that you hated the or you disliked OBGYN the least, I think is what you said, which is interesting.
Oops.
Uh, but I guess the thing that I'm most interested, but I thought was compelling reading about what you were doing is this process of kind of self-actualization, finding who you are, kind of early. I would say a lot of people are in this process for a long, long time and then kind of come out on the other end and be like, oh, maybe I'm not what I thought I was going to be, or maybe this doesn't bring me the full level of fulfillment that I thought it would. And so they have to kind of retool and recalibrate. And, certainly the focus of this podcast isn't to convince people to leave medicine. I'd like actually people to stay and be excellent physicians, but you have to find a way to do it in a manner that fulfills your needs and, makes you a more complete whole person. And so I think it's interesting as a very young, early stage physician, you found that. And I'd like to hear a little bit more about that process.
Yeah, yeah. And I think it's interesting too. Like when I look back, I'm like, how did I do that? Like, how was I able to do that? And that's something I'm always asking myself because I think it is important. Like if you're able to do something like quickly and easily, it's like you really want to figure out what were the factors that let you do that so then you can help other people with that thing. Like anytime you have success in anything, it's like, how did I have success there? And so that I can help other people have that. And so as I've like reflected on that and really gone into that, it keeps coming back to I felt connected to my intuition. I developed this connection. I didn't always have this, but in fourth year of med school, I started meditating and journal. I'd been journaling actually for a very long time, and I just had these practices of meditating, journaling, connecting to myself, and it's like yourself knows the way. Your body, your gut, your intuition, whatever you want to call it, like we all have that within us. We all know the way. But we can become conditioned to not trust our our knowing, our nudges, our little glimmers, those things. Like you have that little spark of like, ooh, this is exciting. Like we'll feel things like that. But then our mind says, yeah, but we can't do that. Oh, but that's not a thing. Or like, oh, I don't have time for that. Or that's actually not practical. Like we just have these ways that we shut down our inner knowing. And really, all it requires is just coming back to yourself. And it's honestly that simple. And I wish there was like some more of a process that I could, create this like really fancy process, but it's so simple. We just connect to ourselves and your heart knows the way.
Hmm. So even as a second year resident, you found that experience. You were able to go back and reflect a little bit on who you were and kind of find that spark. And I'm just curious how like it takes a lot of guts to leave at that point.
Yeah.
And I'm curious how you did that. And again, I'm not necessarily saying that's the path for others, but it was the
Yeah.
path for you to find that. And I'm interested to see how did you have the courage, and then kind of talk through the practical side of it. You probably had debt like all the rest of us. How do
Mhm.
you how did you make that happen and decide, okay, I'm actually going to go a different path?
Yes. So I think it has to do with it's like you want to have something that you're running towards, not just running away. So if I if I was just in this place of rock bottom burnout and struggling to get through the day, which I was, like I was in that place, struggling to like get up, like drag myself out of bed, finish all my notes, do all the things that you're supposed to do in residency. If that was the only part of the story and I was just feeling like, oh, it's not this, this isn't the thing I want to do, but I didn't have something else I did want to do, I don't think I would have been able to leave. I think I would have just like, I need to find a way to power through, or maybe I change specialties, or maybe I, just kind of figure out a way that I can tolerate and survive. But because I was going through this process of connecting to my intuition and kind of coming back to myself, I was actually discovering what I did want and like the things that I was feeling so compelled towards, that then it started to feel like almost this deep FOMO. Like I was like, I don't want to FOMO my purpose. Like I was like, I am so compelled at wanting to like, I want to learn so much about psychology and human potential. And I call it the rage to master. So it's like this internal drive. And maybe you've experienced this before in different like areas of medicine, but it's like this internal drive to like know everything you can about a subject and like become the best you can be at something. And it's something that it comes from within. It's not about someone else telling you you did a good job. It's not about someone like you're not doing, because I feel like in medicine, like in surgery and stuff, I was doing a good job so that like I didn't harm patients. I was like, well, I need to learn how to tie these knots so like things don't come undone. But I wasn't like, I'm so interested in surgical technique. And I'm so, it wasn't this like internal drive. It was very external. But when I started learning about things within psychology and spirituality and meditation, I felt this like internal drive of like, I want to know everything about this. I want to learn so much. And it just felt like going to work every day and being a doctor was like getting in the way of what I actually wanted to do, which sounds ridiculous to even say that. But and I also wanted to travel. I started learning about people who worked remotely. They like did stuff on their laptops and they traveled the world. I was like, I want to do that, even though I hadn't really traveled at that point. So I just started to develop these interests and passions that were so compelling to me that it just really like pulled me towards what I felt like my future needed to be. And obviously there was fear, and we can talk through any of the practical things, but if I just kind of break it down, there was a point where I did an exercise. I did a journaling exercise. I still have my journal from residency too that I'll look at from time to time. But I did this journaling exercise and I was like, what are all the reasons I'm telling myself about why I can't leave? And I wrote them all down. And there was a lot. There were so many. It was like, well, what if I actually leave and I'm not happy doing something else? Like, what if this was my thing and I just messed it up by leaving? And what if I never find a way to make money while I'm traveling? Like, what if I travel and I realize I don't like traveling and I get homesick? What if I can never find someone to take care of my dog? I had a dog in med school. What if I can't find someone to, take care of him? And I was writing all the fears out, all the things. And then I got to the end of my fears. And then something else came up. And it was like, but what if I never go? Like, what if I never see the world? And all of a sudden that just felt scarier to me than all the other fears that I had just written down. And so I was like, okay, I think I have to try.
Yeah. Well, no, it's actually good. I think that's a good process to write it down, because sometimes you're in the middle, especially residency. You're so busy. It's hard to take time to step back and reflect on anything, much less like a big life changing decision like you had.
Yeah.
And that is a good process. I think that, for anybody can kind of look at that, because all of us have to go through this process where we have to realize what's actually important in our lives. And
Yeah.
we see patients go through it. I've been pretty open on this podcast. I've had a cancer diagnosis myself, and it really puts you back to square one and say, okay, what's actually important? What would I do with my life if I had a limited amount of time to live, or if I had this, I only had so many things I could accomplish in life, what would I want it to look like? And you have to list your fears and your worries. So that's actually a pretty good exercise to sit down and write it down. And interesting that you came up with the decision that living in a different life than you had set up at that point actually was the thing you feared missing out on the most, it sounds like.
Yeah. Yeah. It was interesting. And then like to your point too of like we're so busy in medicine and we're just like in this grind and it's hard to have that space to reflect. I took a 5-week leave of absence during residency in order to have that space. And I do feel like that is really important. Like if you're in a place where you're questioning things or you're feeling burnt out or you want to come up with some kind of way to redirect yourself, whatever that looks like, I think it is really important to take some space, even if it's like a week away of silence or like a full weekend where you're not checking your phone and you're just, connecting into yourself. Like having that time to process and reflect was really important.
Yeah, well, that's a good suggestion too along the way here. I think anybody on this podcast could listen to that. That's good advice
Mhm.
for like no matter what life stage you're in,
Yes.
just to sometimes step back and reflect. Like we go on vacation. My wife and I talk about there's trips and there's vacations.
Yeah.
We've
Well,
gone
if
on
you're
a lot
taking
of trips.
kids with
You know, you
you.
take the kids and it's really fun and it's a great trip and we take lots of
Yeah.
pictures. But it's you come home and you're like, oh, now I need a vacation because I'm exhausted. So
Yeah.
kind of the idea of taking some time just to step away and reflect and take a
Mhm.
vacation either by yourself or with someone that your spouse or someone that you're really close to kind of bounce those ideas off of so that
Yeah.
you can kind of find fulfillment. And then again, most people probably don't decide to leave medicine, but a lot of people need to reframe, redirect, and say, I can't be
Mm.
consumed by this because it will eat you alive. I,
Yeah. And even if you don't have like a vacation that you can take or whatever, it's like I even have my clients, I'll like drive to work in silence. Just don't listen to anything. Don't have like, we have like music or podcasts or something. And it's like just take moments of the day that you normally are filling with stimulation and just replace that with silence. Maybe it's like you go on a walk in silence and just having that time. I've had clients have so many ideas and realizations. If they have like a 15, 20-minute commute and you're doing that in silence every day, that's enough to like really give you some space to have
yeah,
clarity.
wonderful suggestion. I mean, that's not just doctor specific. That's everybody. We all have to kind of tune out the
It's true.
noise. I mean, no other generation has lived in a time with so much constant stimulation. You can have something electronic in your ears at all times or
Yep.
be watching a screen at all times. And some people
Yeah.
find themselves in this kind of addiction cycle where they're always.
Yeah.
And it's pretty important for us to step back and just take a few minutes every day to reflect and say, okay, what good did I do in the world? What would I do better next time? What does this look like, tomorrow? What does this look like in 5 years? I think that's really good advice. Well, so the other piece I wanted to ask about is a little bit of the financial stuff, Chelsea. So
Mhm.
again, maybe you had access to scholarships and stuff like that, but most people would get to that place in residency or even in early stage career medicine and say, I can't leave because I'm $200,000 in debt. How could I possibly make that decision? So I was curious about the practical side of that for people who, again, not necessarily leaving, but those who need to slow down or step back or
Yeah.
change directions because that is a really big piece of it. And in some ways, I've kind of resented the fact about being trapped in some ways. Like, okay, I've sort of paid into this, and now I have this huge debt burden. How would I ever escape this place I've placed myself in? Now I'm obligated to work crazy hours and in this really interesting career. And I've loved medicine. Like it's been a really good fit for my personality, my values, and the things I
Mm.
like. But I've thought about that. Like, okay, what if I did want to slow down, or what if I did want to do
Mm.
something different, or take a break for a while? Well, you've got to pay off all those debts, and we get
Yeah.
about 10 years delay in actually starting that process compared to our peers who left college education type stuff when they're in their early 20s. And a lot of people in medicine don't start that until they're in their 30s sometime for any actual real wealth creation.
Yeah. Isn't that so interesting? It's like, yeah, when you learn about wealth creation and it's like the time is everything and the earlier
Time is
you start
everything.
investing, the better. And it's like, wow, once you realize all of that, it's like going into medicine is not a very profitable, it's not as profitable or lucrative as you think it's going to be when
Only
you
if you
really
stick with
factor
it for
in
a
all of
while.
that.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. But so to your point too, like this is something that like my clients have struggled with of even just being able to like cut back hours and like to go to part time because they're like so aggressively trying to pay back loans that even the idea of like dropping hours and then dropping income feels prohibitive. Like so there's just this amount of like feeling trapped because of loans. And so I'll share my perspective and my story. And I actually have a podcast episode coming out soon where it's like 3 things I learned about money. It's like when I learned these 3 things about money, then I allowed myself to quit medicine because for a while, the money was the thing that was keeping me stuck. So even when I went through a burnout in intern year, I was like the first time I had it, and I was like thinking about leaving, and I was like, well, but I can't because of the money. So I did have student loans. I had a scholarship, a partial scholarship, but it's still really expensive. And so I still ended up with like over $100,000 of
Right.
student
Yeah, I think
loans.
we all had scholarships, but a $10,000
Scholarships.
scholarship is wonderful. But then when you put it against a $200,000 loan, you're like, well, thank you, I really appreciate it, but
I
it
know,
just
it's
is
so
such a
funny.
small
It's like a
percentage.
drop in the bucket at that point.
Right.
And then it's like all the, honestly, like paying for all the interviews and stuff. Like that took a lot too. It's like
Hmm.
the tuition, of course, but then you're like paying for interviews and traveling to all the places. I went to like 17 interviews around the
Right.
country. And so
So
it's like that just
expensive.
adds up. So I did have over $100,000 of student loans. And I did a consult call with this like physician burnout coach when I was doing my 5 week leave of absence in second year. And on the call, she did this question, which is a really good question for everyone. It's like, okay, if I had a magic wand and you could have anything you wanted for your career, like what would you want your like day to day to look like? Like what would that be? And I described my day to day where I was like, oh, I want to wake up, I want to go to a cafe, and just kind of like do some work. I want to like have time for a slow morning routine and meditate and sure. And so I'm like describing my whole day, and as I'm describing it, I'm like, oh yeah, this sounds great. Like this is so juicy. And then at the end of it, she's a physician herself, and so she was like, so like you're not going into the hospital, you're not seeing patients, like what's happening in this? I was like, oh no, I'm not. And that part was really clear, right? So it's like I have this ideal. And so basically through that thing, I'm like, oh yeah, I think I don't want to be a doctor anymore. And then she asked, well, what's stopping you from doing that? Like from getting that? And I was like, the money. And then she asked me, okay, like anything else? Like what else is coming up? And I like really went in and tried to, like search, like, is there anything else keeping me? Like what else is getting in my way? It's like, no, like actually nothing else. It's just the money. And then that stuck with me in such a big way where I was like, whoa, the only actual thing keeping me from living this juicy life that I really want to live is the money. And so at that point, I was like, actually, I'm not okay with that. Like, I'm not okay with that being the thing that holds me back. And so at that point, I was like, I need to just figure out a way to pay back my loans that doesn't require me to be a doctor. And so then I was like, I looked up some different things about loans and like what's going on because you feel a pressure to pay back your loans, right? Because there's like the interest monster that just grows and
Oh
grows. And
yeah.
then there's just like, so I was like, and I grew up in a household where like nobody took on debt. Like I think when I took out loans for med school, I think I was the first person in my whole family to ever take out student loans. Like my dad was like a big Dave Ramsey fan, and like we had the budget envelopes, and like nobody was taking out debt. He like paid in cash for a car, like, and we talked even for me about one point like going and doing the military route, so I didn't have to take out loans, which I'm very glad I didn't do that. But so it was a big deal, and I feel like in my family they also were very much like putting a lot of pressure on me to like pay them back fast and like come on, you got to like pay them back. Even in residency you need to be paying them back so that your interest isn't growing. And so I did feel like that pressure for a long time, and then I was just like, you know what, I'm not gonna care. I'm gonna pay my loans back $1 at a time if I have to. And if I die and there is still a balance on my student loans, I'm just okay with that. And I just stopped making it mean anything about me that I had loans. I stopped giving myself any sort of timeline to pay them back. I did look up some things and realized if for certain loans that you take out, so for the loans that I have, because of like they're a federal loan and like because of where they're coming from, if you're paying back the minimum payments for 25 years, it just goes away at the end of that. They're just forgiven. And so you can do income-based repayments indefinitely. And then they can go away. So anyways, I looked up all these things and I was like, you know what? I'm not going to rush. I'm going to pay them back $1 at a time. At that point, I was like, I'm going to build a business. I knew I wanted to be an entrepreneur somehow. I'm going to build a business, and I'm going to build a 6-figure business. I decided, I was like, yeah, other people do that. I can build a 6-figure online business. Why not me? I think I had
Sure,
like
why
one
not?
example. I was like, I really thought I wanted to be a travel blogger, which is so funny. And so I had this one travel blogger I admired, and I would like read all of her stuff. And I was like, oh, she has a 6-figure business. I could do that. Why not? And so I just
Right.
decided, I was like, I'll just make as much money as I would a doctor, doing my business and then I'll pay them back anyways. And so I think I just decided like I'm going to find a way to make that income my way. And I'm going to not put pressure on myself to rush to pay back my loans. I'm going to keep paying them back. I'm doing income-based repayments. But now, even now, when I could put more money towards them because I'm like doing well in my business, I just like don't because it feels like it's going into a black hole of nothing. And it's not actually helping my wealth creation like we were talking about. So yeah, I don't know. I know this is not like I'm not a financial advisor or planner, but this is the way I'm doing it. And this is how I think about it. And when I look back on my past 6 years that I've had since deciding that, the freedom I've had from not making decisions based on saving more money to pay back the loans and like the freedom I've felt with like what I do with my money and with my time and all of that has been so much more meaningful to me than knowing that I'm paying down certain amounts on my loans. And so that's the way I think about it. That's the way I like to live my life. And honestly, it's also freeing.
Yeah. Well, and we've talked a bunch on this podcast about just the concept of financial independence, not as a method of like necessarily like, okay, I'm getting FI so that I can just leave and do nothing and but so that you have that freedom of thought to say, okay, I don't have that hanging over my head. I can do whatever I want. I can start a business. I can take a sabbatical. I can go branch out in a new direction. I can go learn a new skill. I can do whatever I want to do. And so you do want to be free. And it'd be nice to not have to take out the loans, but our system is not set up to really allow people to do that unless you come from a lot of wealth, or you choose the military route, or you choose something that really gets you. But the military route obligates you for a lot of years, which is worth a lot of money of your time. Is your most precious non-renewable resource. So I think that the principles that you've described are applicable to almost everybody, to say, look, I want to be free of money. And, the Dave Ramsey principles included. That's the idea, is try not to borrow stuff you don't need to borrow, and pay down stuff that you do borrow as quickly as you can, and get in a place so that the money is not the decision making. I think that was an interesting exercise you went through at that early stage, to say, if because you didn't find resonance with medicine, it just wasn't your thing.
Right. Yeah.
And you were able to say, the thing that is really keeping me here are these loans, these debts, and you figured out another way to do it. And so it still is there, which is kind of hard.
It's still there, but it like actually doesn't bother me. And so this is something. It's like, no matter what, if you're like staying or leaving, that's not the relevant part. It's just like how much of your decisions are from that place. So it's like I've had clients who were really wanting to just take like I said, like go more part-time, but because they felt like they needed to pay back their loans on a certain timeline, they wouldn't let themselves. And then they're like really going into this deep burnout territory, and they feel like they can't stop, even though they could if they just decided to like go slower on paying down their loans, or like, so it's like really just having your own priorities in mind when it comes to finances, and like just being able to feel empowered to make your own decisions. And like every choice has consequences. But you can decide if you want those consequences, like, but choosing to continue to pay them down really fast when you're burnt out, there's a consequence there. But, so it's like just coming back to what's important to you, and like you get to make your own empowered choices and then decide what consequences you're okay with.
Yeah. Well, that makes perfect sense, Chelsea. I shared with you on, just kind of health stuff. I've thought about this a lot recently. And the thing that I think maybe drives a lot of this is time, like I said before, is our most valuable non-renewable resource. And the thing we all have to step back, no matter what you're facing, is to say, what do I do with my time? Because everything else, I can get more money, I can do different things, I can move, I can change a lot of things about my life, but I can never get more time. And so you have to kind of step back and say, am I spending the time that I have doing the things that are most relevant? And part of it is just taking care of your house, of your family, and your debt and your job. And there's some of that we just have to live. We have to be able to have the resources to live, but we also have to step back and say, okay, what is most meaningful for me to do with the time that I've been granted? And the earlier we figure that out, the better. And I think it changes, chapter by chapter. You go through one life chapter and then you go to another one. You may find how you spend your time modifies a little bit, but you don't have the freedom to make that choice if you're in debt up to your eyeballs. And so it's nice to be able to have that not be the driving force, because you look back on life if it was taken from you early and say, I made all these choices because I borrowed money. It was just sort of this artificial construct. It's a lot better to say, I spend time doing things that are relevant and meaningful, and I build the tools in so that I can do those things. And one of those things is to try to not take on more debt than necessary, and another one is to just be financially free of it, so that that is not the driver.
Yeah, but it also like it's in your mind too. It's like there's you can sort of choose how you view all of these things so that you are free at any point along the way.
Yeah. Well, so Chelsea, what comes next for you? This is really interesting. You started a business. You've been successful with generating income, which is, for a
Mhm.
lot of online entrepreneurs, the income part of that is elusive. So that's great that you've been able to do it. You've been able to meet your needs. And I'm just curious. You're just kind of early on in this path, and I'm curious what comes next for Chelsea Turgeon.
Yeah, yeah, I love that question because it is fun where it's like you hit the goal that you felt for so long was like the biggest thing you dreamed of, which is like where I'm at now. And now it's like, oh, okay, now what's next? So what am I doing next? And so I've had this like online business for like yeah, almost 4 years now, where it's like that's successful, and I'm loving the work I'm doing with that. I want to grow that and continue to just like build an impact there. And another part of it that I'm feeling drawn to, because I started my business like during COVID. And so nobody was doing in-person thing, like everything was very virtual at that point.
Right.
But something else I'm drawn to is having in-person experiences and like in-person retreats. And something I keep coming back to is I want to like create a healing center in Mexico. That's like where I have my base now, where people can come and recover from burnout and like do some of this like soulful sabbatical kind of work. And we can do it together in person and just create a space where people can. I've gone around the world and like I traveled to over 55 countries at this point, and I did a little bit of what I call like spiritual tourism, where it's like I've done like different like healing modalities and like learned from different cultures around the world of like how they heal and how they communicate with the divine and how they process things. And it's like I want to bring all of the meaningful healing modalities I've learned from around the world and like bring those into this one healing center to heal the healers essentially to heal the people who are draining and depleting themselves to help others. And so that's sort of the next big vision. I also want to create a gap year program for people right out of high school in the US. It's a gap year is not really a thing, a concept as much in the US, but when you travel, you realize almost every other country, almost every other like developed country has this culture of taking a gap year after high school. And where they're like sometimes they do a working holiday where they go to another country to work and travel, but or sometimes they just save up their money and or like they have a military thing and then they travel after that. But a lot of other countries have a year where it's pretty expected for youths essentially to travel and define themselves before committing to a career path. And I find that I think that would be a really cool like thing to implement within the US is to create a gap year program or culture or system where after high school, people can kind of immerse themselves in a real world experience while also introspecting, doing the work of connecting to themselves and their values. And then they get to choose a career path that's really aligned with them and what they want and not their familial influences or pressures that maybe would lead them to kind of like basically the clients I work with and the thing I did is I got so far down a path, I'm so in debt. And then it's like, oh, this isn't the right path for me. But if we could prevent that, if we could help get you on the right path earlier, it's like my preventative medicine technique for careers, essentially. It's like
I
creating a
like
gap year
it.
program.
I like it. Well, the concept, like we talked about before, if you're going to spend all this time and money and resources to become excellent at something, you want it to be something that you are passionate about, that you
Yeah.
like. You've heard the phrase that if you love what you do, you'll never go to a day of work in your life, type thing.
Yeah.
And I don't know that medicine fits that very well because it's so all consuming and the hours are nuts. But I have found great fulfillment by helping people and being a physician. I love that part of my job, but it's nice.
Mm,
It would be nice to be able to say, okay, I can kind of add and subtract time and dedication level and all that stuff as the career advances. And so you've been able to find a
yeah.
way to do that. And it sounds like you've got a plan to help other people in the future, and you'd probably be outrageously successful.
Yeah, that's the plan. Thank you.
I like it. Well, Chelsea, I've learned a lot, and I think our audience will love this. Do you have any other thoughts or things that you would want to share with our audience?
Yeah, the one thing I want to just bring it back to is I don't know if I said this specifically, but I talked about like following your heart and following your intuition. But I think we have a tendency of like almost ignoring our own emotions and instincts and kind of gaslighting ourselves out of our own experience. Like if we're feeling unfulfilled or if we're feeling burnt out, like we're so used to suppressing and powering through. But I just want people who are listening to know like how you feel matters. And whatever your body, heart, soul is telling you, like that is important and that is really valuable information. And so the more we can just listen to ourselves and acknowledge how we're feeling, whatever that is, I think that's just such an important practice that we can keep coming back to.
Yeah, it's kind of the concept of heal the healers or help the people who are in that role because it's
Yeah.
the unique role. I mean, being a physician, being
Yeah.
in that position of healer, like I'm so thankful for people who have helped me in my troubles, and
Yeah.
I honor that so much when it's been my time to need help. I can show up and there are people there to help me, and I just honor the huge sacrifice it takes to gain that level of skill. And when you show up and you're the patient, it's like I want this person to have the expertise, and I honor the sacrifice it took to get to that. But you also don't want to get people to the place where they've spent tens of thousands of hours training in something, and then we just grind them into the dirt with working and EHR stuff and insurance prior authorizations and all the stuff that drive everybody nuts. So it is really important to reflect and think about what makes the most difference and how can you be of the greatest force in your job. And working more hours is not always the right answer for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, Chelsea, I appreciate you taking the time to do this. I think this will be instructive for a lot of people, and again, I'm not hoping that everybody on listens to this will leave medicine, but I hope people will find the way to more fulfillment and find like where you do fit and what is the thing that
Yes.
drives you and how would you use your time if you could design your own life like you said, and how would it include medicine in a way that is fulfilling and meaningful, and then that helps you also be a better physician when you show up the next day because you are there having had your glass full or your cup full so that you can go and keep doing that for other people in a way that doesn't leave you feeling shallow and empty
Yeah. And that you're staying and you're doing the work because you're choosing to,
because you choose to.
and it's meaningful and not because you feel trapped or stuck or like you have to. It's like such a different
Right.
energy to be like, oh yeah, I am choosing this and this is what I want to do. And then you get to show up in a way that is better for everyone.
Yeah, and appreciate the good reminders about just taking time to meditate and think and set goals and journal, all those things that are so
Yeah.
important, and yet it's hard to find time in the middle of a busy life to do all those things.
Honestly, yeah, I get it. There's a lot. There's a lot we're rushing around to. So
No
it is
doubt.
hard, but
Yeah. Well, Chelsea, thank you so much. I really appreciate it, and I look forward to being in contact with you in the future. Thank you so much.
yeah, thank
Thanks.
you.
Bye. Thanks for tuning into the Doctors Making a Difference podcast. And thank you for what you do to help your patients and your community. Your work truly helps so many people. We produce this content to help you have the tools you need to stay in medicine and to highlight the amazing work being done by physicians around the world. Please note that while I am a physician, and many of the guests on this program are also physicians or other professionals, the discussions on this podcast do not represent my employer or any professional organizations to which I belong. This podcast is for your information and entertainment only, and should not be taken as professional advice. You should seek appropriate professional advice pertaining to your own situation. Please check out more of our content on our website, doctorsmakingadifference.com. Also, please follow, like, or subscribe on your podcast player or YouTube channel and give us a 5-star rating. It really helps to spread the message. Finally, if you'd like to be a guest on the podcast, or if you'd like to nominate someone else to be a guest, please visit the website or email admin@doctorsmakingadifference.com. See you next time.